Welcome back, everyone. Civil servants in this province have been waiting 5 years for whistleblower legislation that has never materialized. But if they've waited this long for it, is it really needed? The legislation was first promised by then Premier Danny Williams in 2007. But yesterday, Justice Minister Felix Collins said that after 5 years, the province is no closer to actually tabling the legislation, and it doesn't know if it even really needs it. Collins says they've examined best practices in other provinces and found flaws with their whistleblower legislation too. Joining me now from Ottawa is David Hutton. He is the Executive Director of the whistleblower watchdog group FAIR, Federal Accountability Initiative for Reform. Mr. Hutton, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, first of all, Mr. Hutton, yesterday this province's justice minister said they've been monitoring other jurisdictions, particularly other provinces, and there are all kinds of problems with their whistleblower legislation. Is there a good model at all for whistleblower legislation at the provincial level?
I think there is, but you'd have to look outside Canada because basically Canada has a very poor track record in this area, with the federal government in particularly doing a disastrously poor job. And because the provinces tend to mirror what the federal government does, none of the provinces has effective legislation either.
Why is it? Why is that? What is it that makes, I guess, this kind of legislation so tough to come up with?
Well, I think there are definitely some expertise required in this area to write good legislation. But you know, the knowledge of how to do this is out there. Other countries have been working on this for decades. There's been research. There's a very clear body of knowledge that says this is what works and what doesn't. I think the problem lies in the political will, and I think the problem is that the politicians either don't understand what a benefit this type of legislation can be for them, or they're frightened of it, both of which would be are misapprehensions.
You've mentioned they might be frightened of it. What is it about whistleblower legislation that would scare them?
Well, I'll start with why they should like it, and then I'll get to your question. They should like it because it's the most effective way of tackling corruption. It's a wonderful tool for them to keep control over their own bureaucracies. You know, if there's misconduct going on within a government department, the senior people may not know about it, or they may be implicated. Either way, they're not going to be running to the politicians telling them what's going on, and so the politicians will often hear about this for the first time by reading about it in the media. That's not very good for them. If you have whistleblower legislation, then they can find out about misconduct early, they can nip it in the bud, they can prevent it getting out of control and resulting in big scandals. So that's why they should like it. It's good politics. Plus the public wants this, clearly. The reason they may be afraid of it is I can really only see two reasons. One is they haven't done their homework to understand why it's good for them and to see that there are plenty of good models for them to emulate. Or the other reason they might be frightened of it is that they fear that it'll expose corruption within their own ranks.
One last question, Mr. Hutton. You know, we've been waiting 5 years now for this legislation. If it's taken this long, do we really need it?
Absolutely. Every day that goes by, we need it more. Canada is on a trajectory of declining transparency and increasing corruption. That's clear whichever way you look. We desperately need this type of legislation at every level in this country.
All right, Mr. Hutton, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.